souls running in color, color, color. Kick the lies that they wonder, wonder, wonder. Break the pressure that I'm under, under, under. Straight stunning in color, color, color.
Welcome to The Color Within, a podcast by SuubiPeople that explores the brilliant, colorful assets that people bring to the world and the environments they spend the most time in, including the workplace, community neighborhoods, and more, all while navigating a world with color codes. I'm Lydia, your host, and join us in this episode where we talk with Lauren, who is a lover of stories and works at a hospital system. We'll explore the color she holds within and how to get to the root of becoming a more equitable society. Join us. All right. Welcome, Lauren. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Lydia. To be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you. And, starting off here, can you tell us more about where you're from and more about your ethnic heritage?
I hail from San Jose, California, born and raised in the Bay Area. I went to school there through college, and I'm African American. A friend asked me today, well, are your parents from America? What about your grandparents? I said, yes. My mother's from Louisiana, my father's from Missouri. So our heritage is African American as far back as we can trace.
Very awesome. And if you could pick one color, the color of your soul, what would that color be?
Coral. Coral is the color of my soul. Yeah. It's my new favorite color. It's warm, it's bright, has a sort of tropical summertime look to it. It's happy, it's somewhat feminine, and it's the color of sunsets. It's a beautiful color.
I love that. And what positive qualities do people say that you have?
People say that I'm kind, that I'm a good listener, that I can be articulate and can express myself well in writing. People say that I'm a sweet person.
Yes. And what are you passionate about?
I am passionate about learning the reality behind other people's lives. I recognize that every person is unique, coming from a unique social and spiritual and geographical and ethnic background. And I love to learn those stories and the things that make other people come alive and give them meaning. So part of that plays out in my work, but that means I like to read stories. I like to watch stories. I'm into things that touch people's hearts. And yeah.
That's amazing. And yes, can you tell us more about your work? What do you do day to day for work?
I'm a hospital chaplain. So my work is to visit people in the hospital and learn their stories. What are they going through in the moment? What have they been through in the past? What are they looking to in the future? My work is to support people when they're sick. Yeah.
That's amazing. And have you ever experienced, just at work, somebody seeing you with all of your talents, all of the gifts that you bring to the table, and really took the time to champion you and to help you grow.
Yes, I have been blessed with amazing mentors in my workplaces. From my very first job, before college, I had a great mentor, and then during college, a woman took me under her wing, and um, right now I have fabulous support from
It's
my
awesome.
direct boss, from my uh, the, the director of our spiritual care department, and from my certified educator in my chaplaincy training program. I have amazing support, amazing encouragement. I actually just completed an interview yesterday where I applied for level 2 chaplaincy educational status. And this team of women unanimously said, yes, we encourage you to move forward. We encourage you to
Yay.
use your gifts.
Congratulations.
We encourage you to continue to grow where you need to grow. And I've just received fabulous support. And I would be remiss to forget my pastor for the past 10 years, who has been uh, such a help and like a father to me, and a friend, and a uh, coworker. I've had wonderful support from my pastor and church community as well. So I'm really rich in people who've believed in me and supported me.
That's amazing. And congratulations on the job, moving up in the job. That's awesome. And yeah. And have you ever, like while you were at work, just doing your work as a chaplain, have you ever experienced inequality or seen another person experience inequality at the workplace?
I thankfully have not had a lot of direct experiences of inequality, but I did have a patient encounter some weeks ago where I felt that one of our young CNAs was being mistreated by a patient who, another generation, an older generation, and different ethnic background. And this CNA was labeled as disrespectful because she wasn't wearing the clothes that this woman from another generation and another culture felt were necessary for a nurse. And that patient very rudely to me said, well, that's not right. And I just can't believe a person would dress like this. And the CNA was simply wearing casual pants and a sweatshirt. And it was appropriate and not offensive to me, but um, this patient expected her to look another way. And in that moment, I sort of froze. I thought, what do I say? But I don't want our CNA to feel demeaned because she doesn't look the part. And I just said to the patient, the times may change, but the care is the same. And I actually repeated it because I may not have been speaking loud enough the first time. And I said, times may change, but the care is the same. Um, and it really just brought back to my memory the times when I have felt demeaned or disrespected because I didn't look the part. It reminded me of feeling judged at time because my hair didn't look the part, or
Yeah.
my clothing didn't look the part to fit into my Christian culture. And I spent a lot of years trying to fit in and look the part so people would accept me. And I've come to realize that we may not look the part to someone else because we all come from different places. And
Absolutely.
I I have to respect how they see the world, but I also have to respect who I am and where I come from and what I know to be true about myself, which is not dependent necessarily on looking the part for someone else. So that's something triggered by that brief experience in my workplace. But thankfully, I haven't experienced too much more that was very overt.
Yes. Yes, thank you for sharing that. And can you share with me a little bit more about what you're accepting about yourself now? Because I know as humans, we're always evolving, we're always learning new things about ourselves and always growing. So I'm just curious to hear more about your journey there.
Oh, that's such a good question for this moment in my life. One of the things that I'm accepting about myself is, it may seem pretty basic, but I realize I spent a lot of years trying to deny or sort of avoid the fact that I was African American,
Mm.
that I was a
Mm-hmm.
woman,
Mm-hmm.
that I was from California, and that I was a younger person coming from a different generation than maybe the older generation that had mentored me. I I spent a lot of time trying not to be who I was in those
Mm.
very
Mm-hmm.
basic ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I'm accepting that I come from California and that good things come from California. It's not a forgotten state. I'm accepting that I'm a woman,
Mm-hmm.
and because I'm a woman, I can I can still serve the Lord and be a minister and a representative of Christ,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
like like Mary, and
Yes.
and I can share about Jesus as a woman. I'm accepting that I'm African American and I come from a history of amazing people who have also come from slaves. And my experience in this world has been unique because of that. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
accepting that I was raised in a Black American church and where we
Mm.
sang traditional Black American spirituals and contemporary gospel music. And
Mm.
we clapped our hands and we moved to the beat. I'm accepting that about my spiritual heritage and loving that
That's
rather
awesome.
than trying to conform to another cultural ideal of what worship is to be. I'm
Yes.
accepting who I am and where I've come from. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, just listening to you, I hear a theme of courage, just bravery. The way that you stood up for the CNA in that room. Um, Sometimes it's hard to speak up in those moments and to be able to also speak up personally, and come from a very internal and a place of solitude, where you can really take the time to embrace, everything that you are. Because it's so easy. It's so easy to want to be something else. I mean, I resonate with that when you said that. Growing up in Colorado, most of the people did not look like me. So it definitely, it takes a toll, to say, yes, I'm, I love being from Africa. I love that we spoke another language, these other parts of heritage, and just, you know, enjoying those parts. So I really appreciate your journey. And I'm curious to know if you could share with me, like, the part about embracing your African American heritage. What does it mean to you to be African American?
That's a good question. Uh, for me, being African American has always been connected with my spirituality and my experience of God, and that's purely based on my experience. Growing up in a predominantly white suburb in California, the place where I actually saw other Black people was at church. And so I began to associate God with Black people and worship with Black people. And when I finally got to college, I was like, can you worship God outside of the Black community? Like, is that possible? I had to know. And maybe that's why I've ended up moving to Walla Walla and ministering among people who are predominantly not Black, because I just really wanted to see if the Spirit of God was enough to connect me to people outside of the culture. And I found that it has been. But for me, my Blackness has always been associated with my worship of God, and especially the music that came from my African American church. Like I said, it was a range of music. There was the spirituals, and then there were the more contemporary songs, and even the youthful fun songs that we would dance to. And worship was so joyful. And I often think about how I coped with like grief when I was younger, losing my dad when I was younger, change in my life. And it was through the music and the messages of the gospel songs that I learned. When I went to choir practice, I could raise my hands or clap my hands and move my body. And I've learned that all of that um, are powerful ways to release trauma, or to work through trauma and to express emotions and get them from being stuck in your body and stuck in your shoulders and stuck in your neck and your stomach, to release them. And that was something I was doing on a regular basis in my African American worship environment. And that music, that movement, those messages of encouragement that you're going to be all right, you're going to make it, God is good, God is the comforter, all of that just really helped me to cope and planted seeds of faith in me. And so for me, my African American roots are, it's are really I really connect to the spirituality of my church. And I know that's not the case for everyone. We all have different things which stand out to us about our culture, but for me it's been the worship that's come out of my heritage
That's amazing.
carried me.
Yes, that's amazing. And it's amazing how powerful music is. I mean, it touches our souls. And I understand that you have written a poem as well. Would you be open to sharing that with us?
Sure. I've written a couple poems, but one is about womanhood, but the other is about my Black identity and just reckoning with the fact that though I was raised in a Black family and went to a Black church for years, I didn't really engage with that part of my identity or my experience. And so shortly after George Floyd died, my boss at work asked me to speak about it. And I took a minute. I took a couple minutes. And I thought to myself, I haven't talked about race in years, and now I'm being asked to speak about it. Why is this so hard, and why haven't I done this before? So as I reflected, this is what I wrote. I haven't talked about race for years. I'm an African American studies major, but I haven't talked about race for years. I was raised in an African American Baptist church singing Negro spirituals and Kirk Franklin, but I haven't talked about race for years. My mother was born and raised in Louisiana in the 50s, and my father was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri at the same time, but I haven't talked about race for years. I never ate pumpkin pie until college. I only knew sweet potato, but I haven't talked about race for years. Growing up, my Black best friend and I would wear bright pink parkas to school, trying to blend in with the crowd of other ethnicities. But I haven't talked about race for years. My hair is thick. No, my hair is kinky. My hair is coarse. My hair is in an afro. But I haven't talked about race for years. My skin is brown, like cinnamon and maple wood, but I haven't talked about race for years. I've lived in small town America for the past 10 years, where Black people make up less than 3% of the population, and I haven't talked about race for years. I've learned that many of the dearest people around me are Republicans and Trump supporters, and I haven't talked about race for years. I have 3 tall, brown, handsome, intelligent, successful Black brothers, and I haven't talked about race for years. I have countless cousins, uncles, and friends who also fit this description, and I haven't talked about race for years. I've heard of countless incidents of police brutality, racial profiling, and outright murder of innocent Black people, and I haven't talked about race for years. George Floyd is killed by a police officer for no cause I or the world can see or justify. And now I'm invited to talk about race. But I haven't talked about race for years. How do you talk about something many refuse to admit has any impact on life as we know it at all? How do you talk about something so fluid and socially constructed? How do you talk about the root issue behind racism, groupism, elitism, and any mentality that creates an us versus them dynamic? How do we root out favoritism, prejudice, and fear? Starts by talking about it. The black, brown, red, yellow, and white elephant that has ever existed in the places where we meet. It starts by acknowledging it is there, even if we claim not to care what color it is. It starts by talking about the damage its presence has wrought in the daylight, even if we claim never to have seen its presence the night before. It starts by talking about the experiences of others whose worldview may be foreign to yours. It starts by being real about the frustration, the damage to body, soul, property, and legacy this elephant has caused. It starts by acknowledging that a change in action takes a change in thought, which takes a change in heart. Who or what can change the heart? For me, this is a question that only experience, dialogue, spirituality, and faith can answer.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Lauren. And I feel like so many of us have that shared experience, people of color. We go on about our daily lives and we're not talking about it. And this is, George Floyd, he's opened up this great opportunity where it's become mainstream, to talk about it. And I am thankful for the pandemic where it's created this quiet space for us to speak. And that poem was just so beautiful. I love you coming and being vulnerable about that. And what was the response when you shared that at work?
I started with my few coworkers, a handful of coworkers, and they received it.
Mm.
You know what? Now that I think about it, I didn't share this after I wrote it. I shared Still I Rise because I wasn't ready to share it with my coworkers. But
Mm.
sometime later, I shared it with a select few,
Mm-hmm.
and they loved it
Mm.
and they appreciated it. And my my supervisor for my chaplaincy training, she shared it with um, the Association of Clinical Pastoral Educators, and it kind of went throughout that national community. And people from around the country responded to me and said, "Thank you for sharing this. Thank you for opening this
It's amazing.
conversation. Thank you for setting the table in the way you did, and for opening us to talk about these things in a way that wasn't like judgmental or this is what you have to think, but it
Right.
just invited others to consider based on your experience and how you're beginning to consider these issues. And so people have told me that it's been a good way to begin conversation, and they've shared it at the beginning of staff meetings and reflections during their meeting times as they consider the issues of race in America, as I'm
It's
considering
amazing.
these issues.
Yes. That's amazing. I'm so thankful that you created that poem. And, you know, there was one line too where you talk about the root of the problem, elitism, that causes people to be divided, and you have a us versus them. When we think about that, in your eyes, what does the solution look like? Like, what does a more equitable society look like, and how do we get to the root of that problem?
Now, that's a good question. Um, for me, I have, like since college, I have always thought that the answer was in Christ. The answer was in God. The answer was in
Mm-hmm.
softening a person's heart toward God, and then in turn toward other people. But I recognize now that many people who have opened their hearts to Christ and God still don't see race as an important issue. Racial reconciliation is still a challenge among Christians. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that that opening of the heart, that vulnerability towards God and others is important. But I also think it requires curiosity about other people's experiences. Because for
Yes.
me, that's what the issue really is. Do we care about how things affect other people? We
Mm-hmm.
can go through an experience and be fine with it because it doesn't impact us. But what about the people who are impacted? And what does it mean for them? That's what that curiosity is what begins to build bridges and understanding. And I think as people have those kinds of conversations and hear where another person's coming from, even if it's completely different from where they do, like that's where we start to build some understanding. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the more real people we know who
Mm-hmm.
come from different backgrounds, the better it is to reduce the prejudice and the fear. But I don't think it's possible to get through life in this country without having some measure of prejudice or
Mm-hmm.
racial misunderstandings. And but it's about acknowledging them, talking about them, working through them. But a person
Yes.
has to be willing to do that, and it requires a lot of vulnerability. Like
Yes.
it's hard for me to admit my own racism, my own prejudice, my own preferences. And um, it's going to take that on all sides to really begin to heal. But it
Yes.
begins with curiosity about the other person.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the quote where it talks about that Sunday morning is the most segregated time in America. And obviously, most people go to church on Sundays. Obviously, uh, Adventists go to church on Saturdays. Um, and it's also segregated on Saturdays as well, can be very segregated. And even though all these laws have been done away with, there's still that separation there. And to your point, you know, people can still claim to follow, and in their minds, maybe that's all they know. And they just are blind to, as you're saying, other people's experiences. They don't have the empathy or curiosity, as you said, to explore other people's experience. My question would be, should that exploration, that curiosity, be a part of spiritual life?
Definitely. Completely. Definitely. I I speak about it, I preach about it, I believe it. My own spirituality has been profoundly changed because I was challenged to consider racial reconciliation as a part of my Christian experience. That was the ground for even the fact that I'm living in Walla Walla today, because I didn't want to limit my my view of the world to only that I knew within my cultural group. As much as I love and respect it, I didn't want to be limited by that worldview because there's so many others, and I wanted to learn and know and begin to engage with people. And I believe spirituality must begin to value looking at our cultural differences and not seeking to dominate them or change them necessarily, but to understand. Yeah, I think there's a lot of healing that spirituality can offer for cultural identity. So I do believe that God made everyone in their uniqueness and their unique cultures and colors and nations. Like, God is not
Yeah.
offended by our differences, but sometimes we are. We are.
Right. Right. And maybe people are afraid of what they don't know, and if you were to imagine, just in a sanctified way, if Jesus were here now in 2020, how would he approach these racial challenges?
That's a great question to consider. I think he would continue to draw people's attention to the kingdom of God. I'm not sure that he would devote the majority of his energy to making a utopia, a racial utopia on earth. I think he would keep pointing people to the kingdom of heaven, where people actually do live in brotherhood and sisterhood, and their various differences and uniqueness are celebrated. I know it sounds escapist, but I think the kingdom of heaven the better country is what is important to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of Hebrews 11, like they're looking for a better country that is a heavenly. And if, the patriarchs and then prophets could have devoted their energy to making this world their home, but they recognized it wasn't. That doesn't mean they didn't make the grass greener as they passed through, but it means that they knew that the ultimate solution was not going to be found in the brokenness of this world. It's going to take a whole new change, whole new world, whole new creation. And it's, as I say this, I recognize that, this is not just a pie in the sky theology. Well, just be happy now because later it'll be better. No, I think we can do something now. But when I think about Jesus and the limited time that he had and the 3.5 years of work he had to do, he reminded people that this world was not their home, with the time that he had on this earth. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Lauren, I have learned so much from you today. I just want to thank you for sharing your experiences, and thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for inviting me, Lydia.
Thank you for tuning in, and join us in the next episode of The Color Within.